Guys, tell me honestly, do you think the raids are too hard in TBC Anniversary? Will it eventually cause the downfall of the game? Let's look at the data, because first, 50% of all active guilds that have done TK and SSC, they haven't cleared. It's a big number, considering that these guilds are attuned, they got consumes, they have Phase 1 gear, but then they hit a freaking brick wall. That causes people to jump ship, causes problems, instability, guilds disbanding. But on the other hand, 50% is actually a pretty crazy number of guilds that have cleared. God only knows what it was back in 2007. So maybe the raids are actually in this perfect level of difficulty right now. Maybe having somewhat, significant amount of challenge is actually perfect for the game. Nobody wants to be handed a participation trophy, right? Well, we kind of do though. I can tell you that spending 18 hours or so forming and making raids the last week, it was challenging. It took a lot of time and stress. Probably have more gray hair now. And it was not something I would have been able to do, most likely, if I hadn't been streaming. I watched a lot of groups end up failing and not being able to fill in those last couple days. I get some of you guys, Phase 2 was absolutely zero problem. Maybe you're one of those guys. In order for people to clear SSC and TK, and for the game to be saved, if it needs saving, we've got to talk about the 4 major things that separate the guilds clearing right now from the guilds that aren't clearing. First, everybody is getting comps wrong in Phase 2 TBC. It's just a fact. That also includes myself too. See, when Phase 2 dropped, I thought you had to bring a range-based comp. I thought that was really the only way, and that melee was absolutely horrible. But I was completely wrong. Because you see, there are actually infinite possibilities for what you could run for a comp, provided you understand the core. The core is basically bringing all the buffs and debuffs, so your Shadow Priest, your 2 Warlocks for curses, your 3 Paladins for buffs. There's a lot of things you have to bring. But then the rest of the slots, it doesn't have to be ranged DPS. It could just as easily be melee, and you would have really the same outcomes. Yes, some fights like Leotheris would be a little bit harder, but overall, your DPS output for the raid and your success would be pretty much the same. One of the fastest runs, in fact, in TBC so far, that really just broke the meta, because a lot of guilds are stacking range. Well, this guild Eternal, they've gone a completely different direction. A lot of people, myself included, yes, we've said melee suck, that it's actually really stupid to bring a bunch of melee, or even to play melee in Phase 2. But I think that was probably wrong. This guild Eternal, they're stacking enhanced shamans and warriors and Ellie shamans, and they have 0 extra range classes, literally as few as they could possibly bring. It's working out great for them, and they're clearing really well. But if you're a range class and you're like, what the heck, I swear you just told me like 3 videos ago that melee was not a good idea, don't despair on that either. Because there is another guild on Thunderstrike called IT, and they brought 13 range and only 5 melee. That also got them through the raids in a blazing fast 52 minutes. So, yeah, maybe it doesn't really matter what you bring as long as you have the core. Though, doesn't seem like any of the groups in LFG understand that. Still though, I wonder if the play anything you want as long as you have the core advice is actually going to be taken by literally anyone. Because right now, if you're stuck on SSC or TK, you're probably very concerned with getting the most geared and gemmed and enchanted people you can possibly find. Probably also not willing to take a chance on someone because you need to clear the content. Otherwise, your raid's going to disappear. Unfortunately, this is not a pressure I really felt with Gruul or Mag or Karazhan, where you could pretty much just bring anybody and clear the content, at least if you're willing to put in a little more time. As someone who wants to raid and enjoy myself, I don't really want to have to gatekeep people, and I don't want to have to say, sorry, you're not able to come because your gear's too fresh. But at the same time, I really don't want it to happen to myself. Maybe that's my bigger fear, is like getting rejected from groups because I don't have the gear. Is there actually a solution for that though? Because yeah, the sweaty guilds that are clearing effortlessly, they could fit in some extra fresh characters and have no problems. But for the rest of those guilds that are stuck, you kinda do have to be more selective, which doesn't feel great. Things like, for example, turning away that 4th Arms Warrior or whatever you have to do, ultimately, that feels like where guilds are heading. Is it good for the game if people have to start gatekeeping? Well, I wouldn't say it's great, but I'm not really sure what the alternative is. But speaking of having a gemmed, enchanted, consumed player, I do have a question just to posit. Which guild do you think actually spends more money? The sweaty guild, clearing the raid in 2 hours, or the more casual guild that's wiping 20 times in a single night? Because there is a compounding issue with difficult raids, which is that guilds get stuck and they end up spending more and more money. They're spending it on consumes, they're wiping over and over again, and that's going to put them in the poorhouse. Whereas the rich guilds, they're able to do things like selling nether vortexes to people, or bring in buyers to get specific key items to fund their guild banks, which a lot of people do. It's like almost 2 different worlds. One guild is just bleeding money constantly, and the other guild's accumulating more and more. But I would note, though, it's not doom and gloom here. You could almost certainly, especially when the content's on farm, get through it without using a single destruction potion or haste potion or a scroll, and really you don't need any consumes at all to clear SSC and TK. it's never going to be because your DPS is too low. All that consume usage you're doing is really in your head or to get higher numbers. But maybe you guys disagree with that. Maybe you think consumes are actually making a big difference, and maybe they are, but they don't feel make or break to me. Then we have the time aspect, because Phase 2, it takes a ton of time for a lot of guilds, which is absolutely fantastic for me, because as someone who gets a big spike in viewers anytime we're in a raid, it's nice. And if you're one of the sweatiest guilds as well, and you're clearing all the content in 2 hours, it's not really much of a problem either. But for many players, they're spending probably 45 minutes to an hour in LFG, they're trying to bring in that last shaman or hunter or whatever's missing from the comp. Then you have your 4 hours of your raid night, where maybe you don't kill some bosses, so you have to come back the next night. And you've also got the other raid to do, so maybe you do TK one night, you're doing SSC another night, so that's like 3 nights of raiding a week right now. Many people, they're just not going to be able to make both those nights. And so you're probably pugging people, and that leads to even more problems, which is probably why so many guilds haven't cleared yet. Now, one solution I've come up with, which actually feels kind of weird, considering how people played back in the day, is that I've completely separated SSC and TK. So if you want to sign up for SSC in our raid, you can do that, or if you want to do TK, you can, but we don't force you to go to both. I wonder if this will become a more common way of doing the raids, because if you have limited time, you treat one of the raids as an entire night. It seems weird, right? But maybe missing one of the 2 raids isn't a big deal. Just like hitting the subscribe button right now isn't a big deal to you, but maybe to some people it would be a huge deal, like me. As for why people aren't doing both SSC and TK, it's not necessarily just time-based though. See, most people, they're picking SSC, even though you could argue SSC is a longer raid. The reason why is that they're not attuned for TK, because attunements, they're too much for a lot of players. They take a lot of time, and they have a lot of friction for new players especially. Literally, almost no one in my guild can get into TK, and it's causing some pretty big issues. If you're one of those giga chads that did your attunements 9 weeks ago, then this probably doesn't apply to you. Feel free to brag in the comments. But most of my guild, they simply haven't done the attunement yet. Maybe they're stuck on the Shattered Hall step or the Arcatraz step. As a result, our signups for Serpentshrine Cavern are stocked to the brim with warriors and rogues, and more rogues. But then we get to Tempest Keep, and it's just crickets. I gotta pug so many roles, and it feels kind of like more of a pug than a guild run. I'm sure some of you would say it's no problem, you just have to play the game a little bit. But the counterpoint is that there are some really big barriers, especially the reputation aspect. Imagine a fresh character that doesn't have any reps at all, you're just coming to the game, you've got to now do a bunch of Shatar rep and a bunch of different reps, and it's not just doing the attunement. It's probably something like 25 plus hours of work you got to do just to get into these raids. Now maybe spending 25 plus hours of work to get into a raid is a good thing too. I mean, it's an MMO after all. You shouldn't just be able to open the game and be in the raid. It's not LFR from retail. But it does also clearly mean we're going to see significantly less players this phase in the raids because they just can't get into them. What do you guys think? Should they remove the reps? Or ultimately, is it fine that half the player base can't really do the raids? Another big problem guilds are having right now is drama. Drama has cost me so many of my guild members. Happens every single week like clockwork. The loot seems to be driving people insane. The paladin tanks, they want priority on all the tier and all these different things, and that means I can't recruit a shaman. Then I bring in a pug to fill out the roster because not everybody showed up, and boom, everybody's mad when the pug wins loot. They start DMing me, they start threatening to leave. The thing is, if you're not fully clearing a raid, the loot becomes that much more important because you actually need it to progress, but you have all these pugs, so you can't really hard res anything, and everybody that's in your guild starts getting really mad that the pugs are winning stuff. Plus, there's just less loot around, so scarcity causes everyone to go crazy. Everybody's on edge, and they're also very willing to jump ship because they feel like they can get more loot somewhere else. They might even get more favorable outcomes for themselves too. But that's not really the only drama going on either, because there are also huge power struggles as a result of guilds being stuck. One of my friends was dealing with this big time, and basically his guild's not able to clear, and everybody's getting really pissed at the raid leader, which is him, by the way. There's always somebody that wants to come in and bring in their 2 cents when you're wiping, and they want to raid lead, and there's some kind of alpha male, but the guy who wants to come in wants the warglaives. Then they're like, okay, do we let this guy alpha our raid leader out of his position, or do we kick him? Like, what do we do? Because this new raid leader obviously has lots of charisma, and he has lots of ideas, and everyone's starting to listen to him, and then people are factioning and splintering off. It's a very common situation, where somebody feels like they could do a better job leading, and in Phase 2, the leadership becomes just such a big issue. Raid leaders might understand the fights some of the time, maybe most of the time, but they don't understand how to concisely explain the fights in the minimum amount of words. Family Man commented this on YouTube, and his idea is basically to do successful raid leading, you have to explain things as concisely as humanly possible, because nobody listens to you after like 5 sentences. But that is easier said than done, because the top elite guild, they know exactly what their tanks should be doing, exactly who their healers should be healing, exactly who the mages should be sheeping. All of that is so obvious to them that they can even put it on a spreadsheet. Everybody in the raid looks at the spreadsheet and it's just done. But in an average guild, if you spend all that time making a spreadsheet, nobody ever looks at it. I don't know why they don't look at it, but they don't. So for a leader in an average guild, you're basically being forced to explain a ton of different things you don't want to have to explain that in a top guild you never have to say. In a random pug that you've been forced to put together because all your raiders didn't show up, that's not really that easy. If you guys have any leadership advice to help everybody out, I would love to hear it in the comments. But there is a big warning, because I think everybody in raids that wants to start taking leadership, you might actually end up hurting the raid more than anything. Because, a bunch of voices trying to talk over each other and explain stuff doesn't really work. Everybody seems to have some obscure strategy from 20 years ago, and they want to bring it to the table after you've wiped like 4 times. And sometimes that works out, like FLK, we actually killed the healer lady and it worked out amazingly and everybody was thrilled. But sometimes it's just massive failure and even more frustration and people just piping up for the hell of it. You kind of have to balance suggestions versus your original plan. If you're taking random suggestions, maybe not good, but sometimes it does work out. If you have any advice on managing that, I would love to hear it. But either way, I'm looking on the hunt for somebody who really does a good job of raid leading pugs. Somebody who can bring in a bunch of random people and communicate new strategies really concisely. I want to see who you guys think is the actual best pug raid leader. Somebody that you believe, maybe it's a friend of yours, maybe you have some VODs or recordings, you could show me, and we could actually learn from it and analyze it in a video. Maybe somebody that's really good at raid leading fresh groups and pugs could actually help a lot more people to get the raid cleared. Anyways, I would love to hear your biggest take on TBC Phase 2. Are the raids too hard, they're just the right amount of difficulty, or are they too easy? Let me know, and thank you so much for watching. Subscribe for Wednesday's big TBC video.